Okay. Hello, everybody. I was asked to do a talk on the Cross A Ranch. And so I agreed and did a little bit of research and talked a lot to the owner, Ronnie Brown. And so I'm giving this presentation, but really, if people have questions, Ronnie is here to answer them. So. First of all, I'd like to go through where the Cross A Ranch is in Niobrara County. So this is kind of a road map, and you can see Highway 85 coming up. You can see this is Wasserberger Road taking off to the left. So go 30 miles out of Lusk and you turn left, and then you go 10 miles, and the ranch is where that star is. So if you've ever been up Wasserberger Road, you know that the road goes right through the ranch. There's a barn on one side and the houses on the other. Here's the current ownership map. And this is the same area. Here's the same star right here. And all of this stuff in yellow is the current Cross A Ranch. So before I go any further into the ranch itself, I think everybody needs to know a little bit about the Johnson family, because the Johnson family owned this ranch for most of its history. The Johnson family was very illustrious and did a lot of work in Lusk and in Niobrara County. So I'm just going to go through the genealogy just a little bit so you get a sense for who these people were, what their contribution to the county was. So we don't know what the grandfather's name was, but he was in Norway. He had at least 2 children, Ellis and Ivor. They were both born in Norway and came over here in the late 1800s. Ellis Johnson had 2 children. Well, I think he had 7, but the 2 that we're really concerned about are Lawrence and Alfred. And from this point on, I'm going to be calling them Yoy and Petty, because that's what everybody knew them by. And Petty, you might see sometimes spelled P-E-D-D-Y instead of T-T-Y. It came both ways. So, but anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about Ivor, and then Ellis, and then the children. So Ivor Johnson was the first one to come to Wyoming in 1876. He was an oil man, and he was a locator for the Salt Creek oil area, which I believe is up near Osage. It was very productive. He was a locator for that, and he had a lot of property up there, so that's partly where a lot of the family money came from. He opened also the Glen Rock coal mines, and he did the town site mapping of Glen Rock. And then he also, which is more appropriate for us here in Lusk, he started the Baker and Johnson chain of stores. It had franchises around, and it was a retail wholesale business in Cheyenne, and had a branch in the old Running Water. We'll come back to this when we talk about his children. He died in 1938. Okay, Ellis Johnson had, once again, Petty and Yoy as his 2 sons. So Ellis Johnson was a carpenter. He came from Nebraska, came to Lusk in 1880. He opened the first wooden building in Running Water. All the rest of the buildings were tents, and he opened the first wooden building. And it was a branch. Now, remember I told you about the Baker and Johnson stores that his father started? Well, he continued those stores, and that his brother started. Anyway, he continued that, brought the franchise here. And then after that building was moved to the new town of Lusk, it was a wooden building, it was moved to Lusk, and it became later on the ironclad store, the old ironclad store, because it was sided with corrugated metal. And that is, later on became the Freelance building, and that is the building that's currently out back here in the museum lot. So that very building was the one that was built by Ellis Johnson. This building, as I understand it, was originally, when it came to Lusk, it was situated just kind of a little bit north of Jim Stevens' shop on Main Street. And it was a thrift shop, and it was a bunch of other things too. So the Johnsons are kind of responsible for that ironclad store. Hedy Johnson was the father of Roy Johnson. Some of you may remember Roy Johnson. And then he is the grandfather of Bob Johnson, who currently is here still in town. Along with his brother, Yoy Johnson, he established the Johnson's Brother Ranch. Now it was called the JA6. And they did that together in 1893. And he kept the JA6 after his brother, Yoy, left to buy the Cross A. So he continued with the JA6. Okay, let's talk about Lawrence Johnson, also known as Yoy. He had 3 children, Harley Johnson, Isla Anderson, and Abilene Outhouse. So Yoy came to Lusk in 1887, and he had a number of businesses in Lusk. He had a store called the Candy Snap, which was sundries, newspapers, magazines, books, and all kinds of candy, of course. And it was really pretty productive. You wouldn't think that a little candy store type thing in town would really be as productive as it was. But remember that the Texas Trail came through at that time. So there were lots of drovers coming through with that. The people were still coming through homesteading. So there were people on the wagons coming through. The train was coming through Lusk. So there were really a lot of people in town, and they bought a lot of stuff from him. So it was very productive. He and his brother, as I said, formed the Johnson's Brother Ranch in 1893. That was the JA6. In 1894, he married Edith Hancock, and more about her in a minute. With his brother, Hedy, he owned a saloon in Lusk from 1895 to 1899. He sold his half of the JA6 to his brother and bought the Cross A Ranch in 1908. And if you look at the material, sometimes it's 1908, sometimes it's 1907. Anyway, in that neck of the woods. He started building the house that's still there, and I'll show you pictures later, he built the house and the barn, started the house and the barn in 1909, and finished the house that is still standing, finished it in 1913. He was also at one time president of Lusk State Bank. And then in 1956, he turned the ranch over to his 2 daughters, Isla and Abilene. And then he died a year later in 1957. So now this is the wife of Yoy Johnson, Edith Hancock Johnson. And in fact, there's still sort of a draw that comes down through the ranch called the Hancock Draw. She came to Lusk because her father, Reverend Joseph Hancock, was sent to start a number of congregational churches in Douglas and Lusk and Casper. And he was one of the first congregational pastors in Lusk. He didn't stay around long. He didn't like the West. He went back east, leaving his family and all his kids here. He married Yoy Johnson in 1894, and her real claim to fame is that she wrote several books, one of which is called The Foreman of the JA6, which was based on a lot of the people that she met when she was living on the JA6. She wrote the book under the name of E. Joy Johnson. And I should say, if anyone has any additional information they'd like to add to what I'm saying, please pipe up, or if you have any questions, any time is good. I know a lot of you know a lot more about this history than I do, so please add to what I'm saying. Now, Harley Lawrence was the only son that they had. And he was originally a mechanic and a race car driver. He didn't have much interest in the ranch at all. He joined the Army Air Force in World War I, and then he did some stunt flying for fairs and carnivals. In fact, he was the pilot, one of the original pilots for Walt Disney out in California. He is famously known to have buzzed homes in Lusk, and the housewives were really quite irate about that because it raised all the dust, you know. So he wasn't popular with that. But he had a charter flying service, and in 1938 he flew the commemorative airmail route for Niobrara County. So he did a lot of flying, but then he started an oil drilling business. It was really a bentonite business for the oil drilling, and then he expanded that to furnish all types of products for drilling wells. He died in 1953. So Edith Johnson, oh, you did that one. The Johnsons, sorry. The Johnson sisters. So you remember that Yoy had two daughters, Isla and Avalie. Isla studied vocal music in Paris and Italy and was an opera singer, and quite an illustrious one at the time. Avalie studied law in Wyoming, California, but there's no indication she actually ever practiced law. In 1956, you'll remember that I said before that Yoy gave the running of the ranch over to these two daughters. They called it the Johnson sisters. And then Avalie died in 1981, and Isla sold the ranch in 1983, and Isla died in 1999. So much for the Johnson family. As you see, they're quite illustrious in the town and in the area. So a little bit about the ownership history of the home place where the buildings are on the Cross A. So stories abound about who was the original owner. Some people say it was a Mr. Lincoln, someone. Others say that there was a J.H. Ford. And then stories also say that the Cross A was formed sometime in the late 1878, 1883 timeframe, and that the Cross A brand started then. The Johnson family history also says that Yoy Johnson bought the ranch in 1907 or 1908. But the county records that I was able to dig up had the first homestead patent issued to a Clarence Sheldon in 1909. So if it indeed they bought the ranch in 7 or 8 and then he was actually awarded the homestead, the patent in 1909, then they bought it before he was fully proved up or when he decided to get the patent. Not clear about how that works. Anyway, between 1910 and 1956, many family members homesteaded or purchased the area around the home place, and then at that time, Yoy started the Cross A brand. So then, as I said, in 1956, Yoy gave the property to his daughters. Then Avalie died, and then in 1983, Isla sold it. It went through any number of new owners after that. First of all, there was and I've seen this spelled Laoming or Loaming. Anyway, I think it was Louisiana and Wyoming, the two words combined, I think. But anyway, ranch partnership. And then in 1987, it went through a whole series of owners, the Federal Land Bank, the EMC Energy, and then Leonard Reese finally ended up with it. And then in 1989, Ronnie and Margie Brown bought it from Leonard Reese, and they bought about 9,000 deeded acres and about that had about 1,000 state and BLM acres. Bought it from Leonard Reese then. So the current owner is the Ronald Trust Brown, and over the years, Ronnie has added to the Cross A by about 6,000 deeded acres and 6,000 state and BLM acres. So I'm just going to show you some pictures. Here's the main house with its very illustrious cottonwood tree. Very beautiful. This is on the left side of Wasserberger Road as you drive through. Here is a picture of the main house again. This is the hired man house, and this is the bunkhouse, and this is the outhouse.
Yeah. Long ways.
Not being used anymore, I guess. But anyway, the house and the barn. This is the barn that Yoy Johnson built and the house that he built. Ronnie and Margie added on the porches around, and there's a little addition onto the kitchen. Here's the bunkhouse, currently used as a visitors. A lot of people stay there, hunters and rock hunters and fossil hunters. Originally, this was the only house standing on the place when Yoy Johnson bought the Cross A. It had a sod roof, didn't look much like this. It's been really fixed up since then. But I guess Yoy Johnson did live in that building while he was building the other buildings. There's now a shop, a Quonset shop. Here's once again the outhouse. And then there's a hangar here that houses Ronnie's never used airplane and the swatter. And a set of corrals out by the kind of by the hangar and the shop. So windmills and cistern. This is the original water system that was used on the ranch, and it still works. Still can pump water, and cistern still works and everything. It's not used as much because there's an electric well on this course for the house and the corrals. But this is kind of iconic if you're driving through there. A lot of people take pictures of this. And then, of course, we have the buttes. A lot of people call these the Crossay Buttes. Some people call them the Davini Buttes because Davini owned this property at one time. And there's a story about a ranch hand being buried up on the top of the big butte. One of Davini's guys, ranch hands, who didn't have any family apparently, is buried up there, but nobody's been able to find the grave. And then the Lance Creek, of course, goes through the property. That's where the trees are. And it pretty much goes through the length of the property. Number of shepherd's monuments on the property. Here's one, kind of barely see it on the top of that knob. A shepherd's monument is, as I understand it, a signal to a shepherd with a flock of sheep to indicate that there is water within sight. That's the way I understand a shepherd's monument. So there's one there, and of course Lance Creek would be the water. Here's another one on another place on the ranch. There are also teepee rings. That's me. And here, if you see the rocks barely in the circle, that's one teepee ring. I think there are numerous teepee rings up on this high knob. The end.
Very good. That was nice. Yeah.
So do you have any questions?
That's all I have, Alexa.
Thank you. Any questions? Any comments? Anything that you guys know that I didn't say?